Today we're starting session 3 in the series of the Gate to the Grave. This is a time where Jesus has completed his work, and now on Monday and Tuesday he's moving between the temple area to Bethany, which is about 2 miles. He would finish a day's work. It appears that his routine is to leave the temple, go to the Garden of Gethsemane or the Mount of Olives, have a prayer, and then travel down to Bethany to spend the night. As we move through this, we certainly see come to play all these groups that I had started talking about. The Pharisees are major players, the Sadducees, the scribes, these people that are called hypocrites and Herodians. The priests get involved, apostles and disciples, and then of course the common people, both well and sick, come into play. As we move in throughout this, we find Jesus in the temple itself. We see where he enters in on Palm Sunday through the gate into the courtyard of the temple. You have the court of the women, you have the porch where Jesus would have sat around and given his lessons. So we're beginning with Matthew chapter 23, Mark 12, and Luke 20. We'll look at the Matthew text to start off with. Then Jesus said to the crowds of the disciples, "The scribes and the Pharisees sit on Moses' seat. Therefore, do whatever they teach you and follow it." Really? What is Moses' seat? Have you ever heard of Moses' seat? Well, in reality, there's not one. It's metaphorical, meaning a person sitting in a high place of learning. We see this many times in Orthodox churches, where when you look toward the chancel or the front of the sanctuary, there is a seat over to the side, and it's often called the bishop's chair. And that's where the bishop would sit. Most of the time, that sits empty. But he then warned them, "Do not do as they do. They do not practice what they teach. They tie heavy burdens upon you that are hard to bear, and they lay them on your shoulders and the shoulders of others. But they themselves are unwilling to even lift a finger to move them. They do all their deeds for others to see. They make their phylacteries broad and their fringes long." Those are two very special things to the Jewish people. A phylactery was a box. You have probably seen these if you've watched news clips from the Wailing Wall and the Orthodox Jews there. They have a little box right up under the brim of their hat, a little black box, and it is tied around their head. That little black box contains scriptures that are very sacred to the Jewish community. And what Jesus says here, that instead of having a little box like everybody else, they have a great big box so everybody can say, "Oh man, look at how he must have a lot of stuff stuffed in there." And then fringes was something that was commanded as the children of Israel came out of Egypt. On your cloak, put hinges on the corner. And those fringes are supposed to be those that keep intact the memory of God. Every time you see the fringe, you remember God. And so he starts talking about it. They love to have their place of honor at banquets and the best seats in the synagogues, and to be greeted with respect in the marketplaces, to have people call them rabbi or teacher. But you're not to be called rabbi, for you have but one teacher, and you all are the students. And call no one your father on earth, for you have one Father, the one in heaven. Nor will you be called instructors, for you have one instructor, the Messiah. So Jesus is drawing a very strong line here. The one that you call Father is the Father in heaven. The one that you listen to as an instructor to tell you things that you need to be doing and not doing is Jesus himself. The greatest among you will be your servants, and all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and all who humble themselves will be exalted. This is something that is played over and over and over again in the ministry of Jesus, is the concept of reversal. The high made low, the low made high, those that are worthy or think they are worthy brought down, those that are humble and poor brought up. And then begins a section that starts with the word woe. This is not it's not woe to you. The Greek expression from this, the root meaning, is used as an insult or a derision. It's pointing a finger. It's challenging someone. Woe to you. And he's addressing this to three groups: the scribes, the Pharisees, and the hypocrites. But woe to you, scribes, Pharisees, and hypocrites, for you lock people out of the kingdom of heaven. For you do not go in yourselves. When others are going in, you would stop them. You lock out the people from the kingdom of heaven. How do they do that? By simply being hypocritical or judgmental. You can't do that and go into the kingdom of heaven, so you might as well quit trying. And what Jesus is saying, you're doing exactly the same thing, and you think you're going there. Woe to you, for you cross the sea and land to make a single convert, and you make a new convert twice as much the child of hell as yourselves. It was something within the Jewish community itself that stood as a long-standing tradition. You don't go out and try to proselyte. The Jewish people were not evangelical. They did not go to the neighboring communities across the Sea of Galilee and into the Gentile area trying to convert these people into Judaism. Woe to you! Whoever swears by the sanctuary is bound by nothing, but whoever swears by gold of the sanctuary is bound by the oath. You blind fools! For which is greater, the gold or the sanctuary that has made the gold sacred? You say whoever swears by the altar is bound by nothing, but whoever swears by the gift that is on the altar is bound by an oath. How blind are you? For which is greater, the gift or the altar that makes the gift sacred? So whoever swears by the altar swears by it and by everything on it. And whoever swears by the sanctuary swears by it and by the one who dwells in it. And whoever swears by heaven swears by the throne of God and by the one who is seated on it. Words of caution. Be careful what you attach yourself to and live up to that. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees and hypocrites, for you tithe mint and dill and cumin and have neglected the weightier matters of the law: justice, mercy, and faith. Those are the same cries that the prophets gave over and over and over again. Look back in Micah 6. What does the Lord require of you? But to love justice, seek mercy, walk humbly with your God. He says it is these you ought to have practiced without neglecting others. Be a part of others. You blind guides. You strain out at a gnat, but you swallow a camel. The word there, which is established as an exaggeration, and Jesus does this many times, especially in his parables, makes things so large it is unbelievable, but it makes the point. The word about straining out is defined in the Greek as to filter out, to strain, to separate. And here he says you separate the little things, but yet at the same time you also let the big things fall out. And then he gets to a part where it's probably been part of almost every pastor's children's minute sermon. For you clean the outside of the cup and plate, but inside they are full of greed and indulgence. You blind Pharisee, first, clean the inside of the cup, so that the outside may also be clean. And we've had those times you have all the children around you hold up a dirty cup, and would you drink out of this? No. But then when you show them the inside is spotless. That's the same example Jesus was using here. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees and hypocrites, for you are like whitewashed tombs, which on the outside look beautiful, but inside they are full of the bones of the dead and all kinds of filth. They did whitewash the stones. They whitewashed the grave markers as a warning. You have, especially with the Sadducees and the Pharisees, both trying to work on the observance of the law to the letter. You have the cleanliness laws, and it says that you cannot come so close to a dead person or else you become defiled. And so they would whitewash these areas of a grave so that the righteous would know to walk around it so they wouldn't be soiled or become unclean. So you also look on the outside for the righteousness of others. But inside, you are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. Woe to you who build tombs, for you build the tombs of the prophets and decorate the graves of the righteous. And you said, if we had lived in those days of our ancestors, we would have not taken part with those shedding the blood of the prophets. Thus you testify against yourself that you are indeed descendants of those who did that. You snakes, you brood of vipers, how can you escape being sentenced to hell? And that's one of the things that the Sadducees strongly fought, the whole concept of eternal life. We first hear of this book of judgment in Daniel, where he says that God has before him a book, and if your name is in the book, you get to go to heaven. If your name is not in the book, you go to a place of punishment. And that's what Jesus is talking about here. Therefore I sent you prophets and sages and scribes, some of whom you will kill and crucify. Some you will flog in your synagogues and persecute from town to town. But of this comes the blood of the righteous. Truly I tell you this, all these things of warning are going to happen upon this generation. All those woes pertain to those sitting around the feet of Jesus. And then what we've sensed in Matthew that's now here in the temple, surrounded by all of these people. Jesus makes a very, very sad statement. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it, how often I would have desired to gather your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and yet you were not willing. See, your house is left to you desolate. For I tell you, you will not see me again until you say, blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord. Shifting to Mark 12. And he sat down opposite the treasury and watched the crowd putting in money into the treasury. Now, you see here the court of the women. Any Jewish person can enter here, men, women, and children. And in this area was often called the treasury. It's where they would give their temple tax and give their offerings, and from those offerings the priest would be paid a salary. There was a temple tax you were supposed to pay, which was 2 pieces of silver a year. Many rich people put in large sums. A poor widow came and put in 2 small copper coins worth a penny. According to the Mishnah, an extra Jewish chronicle, this court was about 200 feet by 200 feet between the lines and the colonnade that ran around it. Within this, there were 13 chests or gathering places for these offerings to be put. They often looked like trumpets. They were bell-bottomed at the bottom, and then at the top, a little opening in a funnel type top, so that you could drop your money in and go in. Of course, part of it was that those who had large sums of coin could go in and drop the money, and chunk, you could hear it hit the bottom. But here was a lady who had 2 extremely small coins. And when she put her 2 coins in, they probably never heard it hit the bottom. So then he called his disciples and said to them, truly I say to you, this poor widow has put in more than all those who have contributed to the treasury. For all of them have given out of their abundance, but she has given out of her poverty. She has put in everything she had, all that she had to live on. And then following that, continuing in Mark, we began to get a text for the end of the age. And he came out of the temple, one of his disciples said, look, teacher, what large stones and what large buildings. This takes me back to the very beginning when I said that in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the synoptics, Jesus made one trip to Jerusalem. So he would have had these folks in Galilee, up north, in the small towns, and now they have come to, quote, the big city. They have never seen anything built on this scale before. What large buildings made out of huge stones. And Jesus said, "Do you see these great buildings? Not one stone will be left here upon another. All will be thrown down." This particular statement would be used against Jesus in his trial about the one who would destroy the temple and then rebuild it. Then suddenly we go from walking out and seeing the buildings to the Mount of Olives. Peter, James, John, and Andrew ask him privately, that's that inner circle, "Tell us, when will this be? And what is the sign that all these things are to be accomplished?" And in response to that, Jesus gives his revelation event, eschatology. Then Jesus began to say, "Beware the one who leads you astray. Many will come in my name and say, 'I am he,' and will lead many astray. When you hear of wars and rumors of wars, don't be alarmed. This must take place, but the end is still to come. For nation shall rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places. There will be famines. But this is just the beginning of the birth pangs." I have heard over and over during my lifetime about preachers and evangelists pointing to this text saying, can't you see it now? All these wars are going on, all these earthquakes are going on, all these fires, all these terrible things are going on. That's it. But these things have been going on for centuries. These things were going on in the days of Jesus. So it's a continuation of those things that he says these are things that will simply have to happen before the end. "But as for yourself, beware. For they will hand you over to councils, and you'll be beaten in the synagogues, and you will stand before the governors and kings because of me, as a testimony to them. And the good news must first be proclaimed to all nations. When they bring you to trial and hand you over, don't worry beforehand of what you are to say, but whatever is given to you at the time, for it is not you who speaks, but the Holy Spirit. Brother will betray brother to death, a father his child. Children will rise up against their parents and have them put to death. You will be hated all because of my name. But the one who endures to the end will be saved." All of this begins to point toward what happens after Christ has arisen. The tensions are so tight within the Jewish community itself. They go after those who are trying to pervert, to dismantle the ancient laws. So if a son or a daughter or a wife begins to proclaim that they believe that Christ is Messiah, they will be arrested and brought into the Jewish court to be tried and maybe even sentenced to death for blasphemy. Children will turn their parents in because they don't want things to change. But when you see the desolating sacrilege set up where it ought not to be, let the reader understand. Those in Judea must flee to the mountains. The one on the housetop must not go down to enter the house and take anything away. The one in the field must not turn back and get a coat. Woe to those who are pregnant and nursing infants in those days. pray that it might not be in winter. For in those days there will be suffering such as has not been seen from the creation that God created until now. No, and never will be again. If anyone looks at you at this time and says, "Look, here is the Messiah," or "Look, there is Messiah," do not believe it. One of the things, what we need to understand in a historical sense, Jesus is saying this probably around 30 BC, AD rather. Within 40 years, around 70, Jerusalem, with all of its mighty walls and grand buildings, is leveled to the ground by Rome. The people had to flee. And one of the grandest yet most horrifying stories in the Apocrypha talks about those times of war and strife. But also a historian by the name of Flavius Josephus, who wrote a history of the Jewish people during the time of this Roman occupation, pointed to an event at Masada. If you've listened to Jewish history at all, that temple that Herod built on a high place that was protected, and those who ran up to Masada and barricaded themselves in, running to the mountain. We might talk more about that in the Zoom session. The story of Masada is a very powerful, sad, yet noble story. He said there's going to be false messiahs and false prophets that will appear and produce signs and omens and lead people astray. And we know that happens. In my lifetime, we've had the Jim Jones event, where he was so charismatic that he convinced men, women, and children to drink poison because they thought he was the Savior. And David Koresh did the same thing in Texas. But be alert, for I've already told you everything. But in those days, after the suffering, the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light. The stars will come falling from the heaven, and the powers in the heavens will be shaken. Then they will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with great power and glory. This is Jesus' prediction of his second coming. Not in elaborate chapter after chapter detail, but just in two verses. This is how it's going to be. Then he will send the angels and gather his elected from the four winds, from the ends of the earth to the ends of heaven. Then what? Does Jesus take them all away? Does Jesus take them to heaven? Will this whole concept of left behind be true, where suddenly all the righteous are just taken out of the world and it's almost as if the world continues on blindly? From the fig tree, learn its lesson. As soon as its branches become tender and puts forth its leaves, you know summer is near. Truly I tell you, this generation will not pass away until all these things have taken place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not. So then we bounce back over to Matthew in his telling of it. But about that day and hour no one knows, neither the angels of heaven nor the Son, but only the Father. How many times have we heard these people predict Jesus is coming tomorrow, Jesus is coming next week, Jesus is coming next season, and on and on and on and on. no one will be able to predict the second coming because Jesus doesn't even know. I remember when I was in seminary, there was a NASA scientist who had put all these things together and had calculated that the end of the world would happen on October the 8th, 1988. I remember a group of us sitting in the student common area there at Candler School of Theology, kind of mocking each other in a way, trying to decide whether we should do our homework for tomorrow or just rock back and let the world end tonight. Wisely, we decided to do our work. For as in the days of Noah, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. For as in those days before the flood, they were eating and drinking and marrying and giving in marriage until the day Noah entered the ark. And they knew nothing until the flood came and swept them away. So too it will be with the coming of man. Two will be in the field, and one will be taken and one left. Two women will be grinding meal together, and one will be taken and one will be left. All of this is the impetus that came up with these concepts of rapture, sucking us up out of this world and carrying us into another. Therefore, keep awake, for you do not know what day your Lord is coming. Therefore, you must be ready for the Son of Man, for he is coming at an unexplained hour. And Mark echoes that. Therefore, keep awake, for you do not know when the master of the house will be coming in the evening, or at midnight, or at cockcrow, or at dawn, or else he will find you asleep when he comes suddenly. And what I say to you, I say to all, keep awake. And then, in bouncing to Matthew 25, Jesus tells a very beautiful, but sometimes puzzling parable. The kingdom of heaven will be like this. 10 bridesmaids took their lamps and went to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were wise, and 5 of them were foolish. The bridegroom would come through at just any time when he decided to get ready, and everybody was to be ready so that when he passed, they could follow in at whatever time. When the foolish took their lamps, they took no extra oil with them, but the wise took flasks of oil with their lamps. As the bridegroom was delayed, all of them became drowsy and slept. But at midnight there was a shout, "Look, here is the bridegroom. Come out and meet him." And all those bridesmaids got up and trimmed their lamps, the foolish and the wise. The foolish said to the wise, "Give us some of your oil, for our lamps are out." But the wise replied, "No, there won't be enough for us. You'd better go buy some from the dealers and get some for yourself." And while they went to buy, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went into the wedding, and the door was shut. This is very similar to the parable about the king who sent out his servants to bring people in to the wedding feast. Later, the bridesmaids came saying, "Lord, open the door for us." But he replied, "Truly I tell you, I don't know you." And Jesus says, "Keep awake, therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour when this will happen." For it's as if a man is going on a journey summoned his slaves and entrusted his property to them. To one he gave 5 talents. Now a talent then was the equivalent of 15 years' wages for a common laborer. 5 times that. Another 2, another 1, each according to their ability. And he went away. The one who had received the 5 talents went off at once and traded with them and made 5 more. The same way, the one who had the 2 talents made 2 more talents. But the one who received the 1 went off and dug a hole, hid his master's money. After a long time, the master comes home and calls those slaves in and to settle the accounts. Then one who received the 5 came forward, bringing 5 more, saying, Master, you handed over to me 5 talents. See, I've made 5 more talents. His master said to him, Well done, good and worthy servant. You have been trustworthy in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. And the one with 2 talents came forward, saying, Master, you handed over to me 2 talents. See, I made 2 more. His master said to him, Well done, good and trustworthy slave, for you have been trustworthy in a few things, but I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. Then one who had received the 1 talent came forward, saying, Master, I knew you were a harsh man, reaping where you did not sow, gathering where you did not scatter seed. So I was afraid. I went and hid your talent in the ground, and so here it is. But the master replied, You wicked and lazy slave. You knew, did you, that I reap where I did not sow and gather where I did not scatter? Then you ought to have taken and invested the money with the bankers. At least I would have received my money with interest. So take the talent from him and give to the one with the 10 talents. For all those who have, more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from those who have nothing, even what they have will be taken away. For this worthless slave, throw him into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. That again is a reoccurring phrase through all of this, that casting out, that putting away in darkness where there is pain and trouble. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, he will sit on the throne of his glory. And all the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate people one from another as a shepherd separates sheep from goats. In this culture, the concept is sheep are clean animals and goats are dirty animals. So he is separating the clean from the dirty. And he'll put the sheep on his right hand and the goats on his left hand. And then that famous passage out of Matthew. Then the king will come to those at his right hand and say, Come, you that are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the very foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me. And then the righteous will answer, Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry and gave you food, or thirsty and gave you something to drink? When was it that we saw you a stranger and welcomed you, or naked and gave you clothing? And when was it that we saw you sick or in prison and visited you?" And the king will answer them, "Truly I tell you, just as you did it to one of the least of these who are members of my family, you did it to me." And then he will say to those on his left hand. Now, there's also an underlying concept here, because in this culture especially, the right hand is the clean hand, the left hand is the dirty hand. And it was thought very strongly about that. Then he said to those on the left hand, "You that are accursed, depart from me into eternal fire, prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not welcome me, naked, and you did not give me clothing, sick and in prison, and you did not visit me." And they will also answer, "Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry or thirsty, or a stranger, or naked, or sick, or in prison, and did not take care of you?" And he will answer them, "Truly I tell you, just as you did not do it to one of these, to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me." And these will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life. Matthew 26. When Jesus had finished saying all these things, he said to his disciples, "You know that after 2 days, the Passover is coming." That Passover would have started Thursday. The Passover itself was to be Thursday night. And he said that that's when the Son of Man will be handed over to be crucified. Another mention of the crucifixion. Then the chief priests and the elders of the people gathered in the palace of the high priest, who was called Caiaphas. And they were conspiring to arrest Jesus by stealth and kill him. They wanted to get Jesus out of town, put him to death, and put an end to all of this. But some of them said, "Not now, not during the festival when Jerusalem is so packed with people, many who believe in him. Not during the festival, or there may be a riot among the people." And that's exactly what they were worried about. Going back to the Sanhedrin, who were there to keep the peace. If something comes on in Jerusalem during this week when so many people are there, and there is also an elevated presence of the Roman guard there, somebody starts a riot, somebody starts trouble, and Rome is coming down. So suddenly we see Jesus at Bethany. Now, while Jesus was at Bethany in the house of Simon the leper, a woman came to him with an alabaster jar of very costly ointment. In Mark it says that it was 2 days before the Passover, the festival of the unleavened bread. This is what we celebrate during Holy Week, that Passover event, although that over time with the Easter cycle that we have and the historical cycle the Jewish people have, not very often do the Christian Easter and the Jewish Passover happen at the same time. The chief priests and the scribes were looking for a way to arrest Jesus by stealth and put him to death, but not during the festival, for there might be a riot. And so while he was in Bethany at the house of Simon the leper, he sat at a table, and a woman with an alabaster jar of costly nard. Nard was a very celebrated perfume, which seems to have a very aromatic ingredient that was used by Romans and other people in the area. It is expensive enough that a pound of that would be worth about 300 denarii, or almost a year's wage. And so she comes in and she breaks open the top of the jar and pours the ointment on the head of Jesus. But some were there who said to each other in anger, "Why was this ointment wasted in this way? For this could have been sold for more than 300 denarii, and the money could be given to the poor." And they started to scold her. But Jesus said, "Let her alone. Why do you trouble her? She has performed a good service to me. For you always have the poor with you, and you can show kindness to them whenever you wish. But you will not always have me. She has done what she could. She has anointed my body beforehand for its burial. Truly I tell you, whoever reads the good news is proclaimed in the world, that what she has done will be told in remembrance of her." She will be remembered because she went to the trouble of pouring this oil upon the head of Jesus. This seems to end Tuesday as we go. And so what ends up then is a tale told in all three of the Gospels. Probably Wednesday. From Matthew. Then one of the 12, who was called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priest and said, "What will you give me if I betray him to you?" And they paid him 30 pieces of silver. And from that moment, he began to look for an opportunity to betray him, Jesus. So, in Matthew's account, Judas goes to the chief priest and is paid right there on the spot to betray Jesus. In Mark, then Judas Iscariot, who was one of the 12, went to the chief priest in order to betray him to them. Many people think, scholars think, that the reason Judas went to these priests and tried to make this deal was not to have Jesus killed, but to basically force the hand of Jesus. Judas, like so many others, wanted Jesus to become king. They wanted Jesus to take over Jerusalem. They wanted Jesus to run Rome out of town. They wanted the reestablishment of Israel, and that's what Judas thought. If I can just spur this on a little bit, all things will fall into place. Well, when they heard this, they were greatly pleased and promised to give him money. So he began to look. So in Mark's account, he wasn't paid ahead of time. He'd get paid at the end of the deal. And then look at Luke. Now the festival of the unleavened bread, which is called Passover, was near. The chief priests and the scribes were looking for a way to put Jesus to death, but they were afraid of the people. Listen. Then Satan entered into Judas, called Iscariot, who was one of the 12. And he went away and conferred with the chief priests and officers of the temple police about how he might betray them. The old comedian, the devil made me do it. Could it have been, according to Luke, that at this point in time, Judas is demon possessed and has no control over his own actions? They were greatly pleased and agreed to give him money. And so he consented and began to look for an opportunity to betray him when no crowd was present. So you've got money in his hand, you've got money promised to him, you've got money promised if they can do it without a crowd. And that brings us to the close of this day. And now we're beginning to prepare ourselves for the Passover event and those last hours of the life of Jesus. Next week we'll be looking at the text from Matthew 26 and 27, Mark 14 and 15, and Luke 22 and 23.